Hello, Sawubona, Mweni and Hazard. I am honoured to represent the African continent as the invited keynote speaker in Cape Town for the first LeNS World Distributed Conference, exploring ways of designing sustainability for all. As you are all well aware, sustainability is regularly oversimplified and misused, which is unfortunate for what is an incredibly important and complex systemic consideration for the continuation of human civilization. My conception of it has been developed over the last 21 years through personal reflection, active participation in design projects, and through broader engagement in academic discourse. I believe one's concept of sustainability is inherently personal, but at the same time would like to take this opportunity to present how the Department of Industrial Design at the University of Johannesburg has grappled with framing sustainable design within one of the most unequal societies in the world. In this regard, I will be exploring the themes of immersion and connection, lay designers and local experts, small and incremental, systems and networks, and concepts and reality. I am well aware that many of you are experts in product service systems and distributed economies, but as is common in Africa, I will take a narrative approach through a series of self-reflections on my past experiences as a means to engage with our approaches to designing sustainability for all. The first aspect of sustainable design that I would like to explore is the immersion of the designer in a particular context and his or her connection with those he or she is designing sustainable outcomes for. In 2005, I participated in the ICSID Interdesign workshop focused on sustainable rural transport. Led by the SABS Design Institute in partnership with the South African Department of Transport, it was held over 2 weeks with about 100 designers and academics flying in from all over the world to explore issues of rural transport in the former apartheid homeland of Botswana, currently the Northwest Province. Participants were divided into teams focused on animal-drawn carts, alternative modes of transport, bicycles and tricycles, and communication. The participants were bussed into isolated communities where designers would disembark with camera in hand, clicking away as they documented the lives of rural marginalized Africans. The bus would then return to our conference venue in an upmarket hotel in Rustenburg to discuss and compare experiences in order to conceptualize solutions to the rural transport problems we had identified. I will never forget overhearing a professor from a European design school exploring one of the participating communities asking, when the typology he was witnessing did not meet his preconceived ideas, "Where is the village?" After 2 weeks of furious yo-yo design activities, the interdesign came to an end, with many of us aware that the time spent exploring issues of rural transport was insufficient to arrive at anything sustainable. With 2 of the Department of Industrial Design staff having worked on the bicycle and tricycles and donkey cart teams, a year later we decided to integrate a continuation of the project into our students' curriculum for the next 2 years. In order to overcome the superficiality of the first workshop, we homestayed with community members from Pitu to Suliang for 2 weeks with the support of the community's young and enthusiastic local chief. I was dropped off by bus with 5 students and no other means of transport. This embedded experience proved far more insightful. We ate the food that was locally available, walked where we needed to go, collected water from the communal standpipes, and bathed in galvanized tubs at the end of the day. On one of the days, we realized that we had forgotten to bring bolts for one of the prototypes, and in this experience alone, the lack of rural transport was crystallized with the realization that this relatively simple task would require a full-day trip on municipal buses to a hardware store and back. Being hosted by and living with people from the community led us to develop much deeper relationships with them in comparison to the parachute design approach of the first interdesign workshop. And even though the time period was similar in duration, being embedded meant that you were less of an outsider, and with your designer's eyes, practically better able to explore the lived experience of those you were designing with. Additionally, in moments of connection, which was often over a meal, external designers were able to discuss and compare with our local hosts what seemed to be completely different worlds. The relationships we built with some of the community members were deep enough for me to continue to remain in contact with a few of them, even though I do not believe that the carts or bicycles we prototyped for them were ever delivered by the Department of Transport. For deep connections with any personal community to be made, designers need to be open for them to emerge. From my experience, this requires a deep self-reflection and mindful presence during engagements. The next aspect of sustainable design I will explore is the identification of lay designers or local experts in projects in order to arrive at outcomes that are firstly driven by local enthusiasm and secondly amplify existing local actions as opposed to imposing external ideas about what may need to be done. This results in indigenous or localized sustainable change. An example of the importance of lay design happened on our final trip of the Extended into Design project, which took place in 2008, this time to the community of Johannesburg. We stayed with a local convenience store owner, with our time there kicking off with a collective bang at the local annual donkey cart race. Donkey cart owners travelled from all around the area to compete for the coveted trophy. In the hive of activity as they began to fill up the yard awaiting the beginning of the race, I became immersed in the pride and creativity the local donkey cart owners had for their carts. These were not basic carts, but the ingenious reuse of available resources creatively customized into South African chariots. This was sustainable rural transport, made by lay designers. People without any training in design, but still following a clear design process to meet a need with the resources available to them. In line with Schumacher's concepts of appropriate technology, what was also clear was that much of the manufactured design of our cart prototypes needed reconsideration to be able to be maintained locally. We also realized that if we had worked with these donkey cart lay designers right from the outset, we may have had more resilient design outcomes. Another example, which shows the importance of identifying embedded knowledge, took place in 2006. When I was provided with the opportunity to spend 2 weeks at Jahangarabad Media Institute in India. Here we worked with budding documentary filmmakers to explore local issues experienced by rice farmers. As South Africans, we had no understanding of the inherent social complexities of having students from multiple castes within a single student group. Early in the project, we brainstormed what aspects of rice farming were most pressing as a means to focus the students' efforts. During this process, a commotion arose in the back of the studio with a group of students clearly aggrieved by our brainstorming process, since the more privileged English-speaking students were hogging the input and biasing the project's focus. We had to ask one of the English-speaking students to translate what was going on. All we could understand was a repeated mention of the word seeds. What emerged was that this group of students were all children of rice farmers. They therefore had the most experience to share with the group, but were not in a position socially or in terms of the language of communication to share it. Thankfully, they were brave enough and felt comfortable enough to ensure their voices were heard. We soon all learnt of their familial narratives around the problematics of the introduction of hybrid versus traditional self-seeding rice varieties in India. The new technology coming up against tradition ultimately led to crop failure for farmers who tried to replant the seed only designed for one planting cycle. The impact of this was brought into stark reality when crop failures were ascribed to the largest majority of the 17,000 farmer suicides in India that year. This was a significant contextual issue that we would have completely missed if it was not for the experts already in our student group. In our current student cohorts, we also have a very diverse group of students, and it is important for us to create a safe environment for them to share their experiences. These may be very different to others in their class. A diversity of voices, although more complex to manage, will almost invariably result in more resilient outcomes. The idea of working with lay designers or local experts may seem obvious, but in practice it is not always so straightforward. A few years ago, I was taking a professor from one of the world's top design schools through an urban farm we had been working with in Soweto. On viewing a few sparse vegetables, he asked me, "But where is the design?" I was not prepared for the question. For me, it was clear. But for someone looking for design in a traditional sense, there was no visual marvel, but rather actions that merged much more subtly with the environment. In this particular case, it was a shallow hole, a few pieces of clear plastic and some coir, all used to speed up seedling germination, ease watering, and reduce water evaporation in a highly innovative and sustainable seedling growing system. Such an observation concurs with Paul Richards, who acknowledged that many of the most successful innovations in food crop production in the 20th century had indigenous roots. As per this example, in many cases the design is already there. As designers, our role is therefore to develop our senses to carefully listen and to look for it. Our design training can then be used to amplify local lay design endeavors. One of the difficulties that designers have with such an approach to sustainable design is that in many cases it is not something that is going to win them any design award or stand out in their portfolio. Much of this work, for it to be sustainable, is inherently about starting small. In 2008, we traveled with our final year students to Grupo Desportiva de Manica in Mozambique. They are an integrated community football club that uses sport for social good. One of the student teams focused on exploring the use and impact of charcoal stoves, which is a standard means of cooking in the community. Building on our prior positive experiences of working with local artisans, we easily found incredibly skilled local fogao or stove makers. They were utilizing old steel railway sleepers and their bolts to fabricate their products, whilst the local government updated the province's railway tracks to sit on concrete sleepers. The student team partnered with Chris Bradnam from our department, who is an expert on fuel-efficient stoves, and together with the local artisans began a process of refining their existing designs using basic emissions testing and temperature sensing equipment we had brought with. The scientific equipment was valuable to measure improvements in efficiency for us, but for the local stove makers, all they needed was to see a reduction in the time it took to boil a litre of water. With deforestation for charcoal becoming a major problem in the region, this small design intervention could help marginally reduce the need for charcoal. But an additional benefit of far more impact is that a more efficient stove largely reduces smoke and particulates, and hence creates a much more healthier cooking environment for those using it. Working with the local fogao makers meant that when we departed, our knowledge remained. Many large-scale collaborative design projects, particularly those that need external funding, such as the Interdesign, are wasteful in their use of resources. Smaller, more targeted interventions require less, and due to their focus are generally more successful in arriving at appropriately sustainable outcomes. Nabil Hamdi beautifully explores small change through the example of the positive impact created by simply moving a bus stop to route through a community as opposed to skirting it. The reason that small interventions can have much wider impact is that they are embedded in wider human relations and technical systems. However, not understanding broader social, cultural, economic, political, and environmental contexts can lead to projects completely missing the mark. One of the other student groups we took to Manica worked directly with the football players, and they noted that the boots that they used were designed for plush pitches and were completely impractical on African dirt. Partnering with local cobblers, our students explored ways to resole the boots using discarded car tires. This seemed like a fantastic solution, reusing waste to make much more durable football boots with much improved grip. However, when they got to the final prototype, they could not get even one of the football players from Grupo Desportiva de Manica to test them on the pitch. What went wrong? Even though the students had followed a participatory design method of developing the new soles with the football players, what had not emerged in this process was the unseen power of social status, an aspiration for these local sports stars. They would rather have gone to the local market with the little money that they had to buy new football boots than repair shoes in a way that only the poorest of the poor would do. The football players eventually told our students that if they wore their resoled boots on the pitch, they would be laughed at by everyone. What we all thought was a wonderfully sustainable and functional solution to the problem failed due to our lack of understanding of the broader social dynamics at play in the Manica community. Another more successful example of how we use design as a means to facilitate broad systemic change is Izindaba Zokudla, or Conversations About Food, a project I helped conceive in 2011. It is focused on exploring ways to make the food system more sustainable in Johannesburg and began from a series of multi-stakeholder events bringing together academia, not-for-profit organizations, enterprise, government and urban farmers to discuss the problematics of our city's food system. One of the key activities of the project is the Izindaba Zokudla Farmer School, which is enthusiastically convened by Nadia Milan. It has run about once a month since 2015 and now also functions as an innovation lab. With over 1,000 attendees in total, and on average 150 people per session, it allows for urban farmers, farming experts, food enterprises, and innovators to converge at the University of Johannesburg Soweto campus. The power of the Farmer School is that it is a platform for networking a whole host of stakeholders in the local food system. This benefits all those involved in terms of new connections, new and more sustainable farming knowledge, shared opportunities for funding, and new technologies. It also benefits us as designers in that disjunctions or contradictions in the food system become opportunities for design intervention. Two such interventions were projects developed by final year Bachelor of Industrial Design students in partnership with local urban farmers. The farmers initially identified the need for something to keep their harvested produce fresher for longer, and something else to more efficiently convert seed into seedlings. The outcomes were an evaporative cooler and a self-watering seedling growing system. Both projects were funded by the National Research Foundation. However, neither of them made it to market. The main reason for this was that although our University Tech Transfer Office were interested in supporting the projects, neither of the students themselves were prepared to take the projects further, and such projects cannot easily be handed over to someone else without a personal investment in their success. This had the unfortunate result of the urban farmers with whom we had developed such positive relationships feeling as though they were used, since their time and effort did not lead to any direct benefit on their part. This is the crux of many of our student projects. Even with all the great ideas towards designing a more sustainable tomorrow, many of them are unrealized. This happens in design schools the world over, and we do not want to continue this trend. After many years of iterations, I believe we are getting to a point where our design research is finally resulting in appropriately sustainable outcomes. A recent example of this is the Begin beehive. In 2015, Ivan Brown began developing prototypes for appropriate beekeeping technology for local urban farmers as a final year Bachelor's in Industrial Design project. Honey is a valuable resource which can add diversity and resilience to the livelihoods of small-scale farmers. Additionally, having hives on a farm improves productivity through the pollination of crops by bees, and this is a major consideration for the long-term sustainability of food production the world round. Initial prototype beehive outcomes from Ivan's project needed to be field tested and further refined through their use towards their wider implementation. In order to do this, the project was expanded into a master's research project by providing 5 small-scale farmers and 6 expert beekeepers with beehives to test over 1 season. The small-scale farmers showed their interest in participating after a presentation by Ivan at one of the Izindaba Zukudla Farmer School sessions. As part of the project, Ivan became a licensed beekeeper to assist the emerging beekeepers to manage their hives and particularly to share appropriate knowledge with them so that they were able to continue their beekeeping activities after the project finished. Theories of appropriate technology, the capabilities approach, and designing for outcomes were used to create a theoretical framework which positioned the project philosophically, but more importantly encouraged the delivery of tangible benefits through the research. Following an iterative human and bee-centered design approach, the appropriateness of the beekeeping technology was evaluated and the hives improved. The final outcomes of the project were 2 lightweight concrete beehives and their molding tools. Begin is now a registered company in South Africa with aesthetic and functional design registrations to protect the designer's IP through a business model that focuses on selling the mold and ultimately distributing the means of production of the beehives. This allows for localized employment in what is a very widespread industry. The molds enable relatively unskilled individuals to produce hives easily at low cost using lightweight concrete. This material improves both the safety and health of the bees, being fireproof and resistant to pests, but also increases the hive's productivity by almost 40% due to its insulation, allowing the bees to focus on making honey instead of heating or cooling the hive. Nothing is perfect. Unsurprisingly, Ivan has struggled with seed funding to get his business off the ground, eventually resorting to selling his car to paying for the first container load of molds. The molds themselves also had to be manufactured in China, since no local South African manufacturer had access to the material thickness needed for their vacuum forming. However, all participants in the project still use their prototype hives, and the orders are rushing in for hives and molds alike. This is a story of success, both for Ivan as a graduating student immediately becoming a business owner, for the small-scale farmers who have diversified into beekeeping, for the beekeepers who praise the hives for increasing the bees' productivity, and ultimately for the bees who seem far happier in their newly designed homes. At the end of the day, this is how the Department of Industrial Design and my own ideas of sustainability have evolved. If I had to choose an overarching philosophy that drives our approach to sustainability in our department, it would be respect. Respect for the people you are designing for and with, acknowledging their knowledge, design expertise, and systems they already have in place. Respect for resources, including the environment, finances, and the time and energy all participants have put into the process by making sure that projects are taken to completion. Thank you for your time.